Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Councillor Adam Stokes. I'm the chairman of this board, and Councillor Tom Smith, the vice chairman of the board, is also in attendance. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcasted live via the County Council's website, and all your comments will remain accessible online as the meeting recording remains on the Council's website. And with this in mind, I'd like to welcome members of the press and public watching this live. I'd like to welcome the executive councillors and executive support councillors who are attending our meeting today. And I'd also like to welcome the following members of the corporate leadership team who are present: Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive; Andrew Crookham, Deputy Chief Executive and Executive Director of Resources; and Andy Gutherson. Thank you. So I would like to begin with the health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the doors behind you and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We will then need to wait in the car park for further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting? And also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch on your microphone? Otherwise, those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public will be unable to hear you. So please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphones to be heard, and the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. If you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand, and Councillor Tom Smith will make a note. We'll try to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions and make contributions. However, I will close down the debate to ensure we keep to time. So therefore, I'd appreciate your contribution to be succinct and concise, and also ask you to indicate early when you wish to speak. We will now move on to the formal agenda. So item 1, apologies for absent and replacement members. Emily, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Karen Lee, Emil van der Zee and Martin Kyle.
Thank you for those. And then item 2, declarations of members' interests. Members of the board are reminded they need to declare any relevant interests which have not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interest form. Do we have any members who wish to declare a further interest? No, thank you everyone. So we'll now move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of January 2024. This is to confirm and sign the minutes from the last meeting of the board on the 25th of January as a correct record. These can be found on pages 7 to 14 of the agenda pack. I don't intend on going through them page by page. Do we have any comments for them, or do we have a proposer? Councillor Smith, and a seconder, Councillor Pepper. Oh, Councillor Pepper, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I stand to be corrected, but unless it was a cardboard cutout, I can recall seeing Councillor Hill over there, and I couldn't see it on the minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, they are. I have picked that up before, and they are amended on the final set of minutes.
Okay, with that in mind, I'm happy to second then, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Following that comment, do we have a seconder for those, please? I'll second Councillor Marfleet. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you. Those are carried. We'll now move on to item 4, which is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. I do not have any announcements to make today, but I'd like to note in relation to last Friday's Council, where the Council Budget 24-25 was considered and agreed. On behalf of this board, I'd like to thank our officers and the teams involved for their dedicated efforts and commitment in the production of this year's budget book. Your work has ensured the delivery of a budget that reflects not only the depth of information, but also the robustness required for effective governance. Your dedication to providing accurate and detailed financial information is instrumental in supporting the overall objectives and priorities of the Council. And as we move forward, I'm confident that the budget for 24-25 will stand as a valuable resource, guiding our Council in its mission to serve our community effectively. Moving on, I would like to point that we have a very tight and busy agenda today. That includes the consideration of 4 pre-decision items. I should therefore like to begin by asking those presenting reports to take these as read by members and only summarise key points and the type of input expected by the board. And introductions of reports will be capped at 5 minutes to ensure we have sufficient time to consider and debate. So moving on, do we have any Executive Councillor announcements? Councillor Bootroyd, please.
Thank you. No, not this morning.
Okay, thank you. And Chief Officer announcement.
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. We'll now move on to item 5, which is consideration of call-ins. Emily, are there any call-ins, please?
No, none received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 6, consideration of councillors' calls for action. Emily, do we have any?
No, none received.
Thank you for that. So we'll now move swiftly on to item 7, which is the Corporate Plan Success Framework 23-24, Quarter 3. The report invites the board to review the corporate plan performance for Quarter 3 of 23-24 and the report to the executive, which can be found on pages 15 to 72 and will be debated at its meeting on the 5th of March 2024, which is next Tuesday. Our actions required are that we consider the attached report and determine whether the board supports the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report, to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item, and review and comment on the performance information that is within the remit of the board, and highlight any further recommendations or further actions for consideration. Comments from today's debate will be shared with the executive in relation to this item by a designated scrutiny officer, and this report will be presented by Caroline Jackson, Head of Corporate Performance. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the Quarter 3 report, we have 43 activities that we're reporting today. Of these, 3 are amber rated. You'll remember that amber means that we are behind the plan, but within agreed limits. The first activity relates to 813, which is working with partners implementing the Housing for Independence strategy. You'll recall this was amber in Quarter 2 as well. It does relate to ongoing issues around the procurement process, around one of the properties, and also around planning permission that have been anticipated to received earlier for Grange Farm. However, we are expecting both to progress in Quarter 4. The newly amber activities, the first one relates to A21, which is working with partners across our integrated care system around setting clear priorities for the next 3 years to improve the health and wellbeing across Lincolnshire. This specific milestone that is amber rated relates to the development of the interim care layer. The expectation, however, is that this work will be completed in Quarter 4. Also, we have A47, which is around the continued transformation around the way we engage with our customers through our customer strategy. Again, we are making progress. However, we were expecting to be able to work on the future call reductions into next year. However, we are still working on understanding the impact of our artificial intelligence, the bot technology that you'll be familiar with, the AskIMP technology, and how this is deferring calls away from the customer service centre. And we need to do further work on that in order to determine those future demand levels. In terms of the key performance indicators, we have 25 that are reported in this report, a really positive picture in that 88% of those are either exceeding or achieving their target. Of the 9 KPIs that are exceeding their target, 6 were exceeding in Quarter 2, so I won't go over these, you'll be familiar with them. But the 3 new measures that are exceeding, the first one is around children in care living in a family environment. You'll remember that we reprofiled this measure earlier in the year to remove the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children from the report, as this was adversely affecting the measure, and we're now able to see this exceeding its target. The second measure is around the eligibility of 2-year-olds who are in receipt of their early years entitlement. Again, really positive picture in the performance, and we're seeing the impact of the outreach support worker that has been implemented, and that's demonstrated through the performance we're seeing. And the final measure is around the number of businesses supported. We've seen an additional 819 businesses supported in Quarter 3, enabling us to exceed the target. In terms of the measures that aren't achieving the ambition or the target set, 13 measures which were achieving in Quarter 2, those that are achieving, 13 in Quarter 2 are achieving their target set. 3 that were not achieving in Quarter 3, 2 of those weren't achieving in Quarter 2. You'll be familiar with the national recycling rate. There's an explanation in the pack around all of the waste measures, and the second measure relates to adult carers supported in the last 12 months. Again, you'll be familiar with conversations around the recontract of the carers service and us reviewing these measures in 24-25. The third measure relates to recycling at household waste recycling centres. We have seen a slight drop in Q3, but we can attribute that to seasonal variation associated with the reduction of green waste. In terms of contextual measures, so these are measures that don't have a target or ambition set, what are brought into the report at the recommendation of the Executive Director. That we have included 2 measures around volunteering, so showing a real positive impact in terms of the improvement of the number of voluntary and community groups we are supporting, and also people supported to access volunteering opportunities. We have implemented there is a new IT platform implemented in January for volunteering, and we're starting to see, we've seen over 100 host volunteer groups signing up for that, and we should see a greater visibility of those opportunities as we go forward. The second measure is around the overall highway score, again showing really strong performance. It must be clear that this is an average score across 5 areas, and a score of over 80% is classed as very good, and it does show that we are keeping our partners on track in terms of the progress being made. Also, I'd like to highlight the number of people using the Visit Lincolnshire website. This is up 82% on the same period last year. But what's really encouraging is seeing that actually from visiting the site, we're then seeing the conversion rate improve, where people are clicking through to either book an activity or request further or look for further information. So they're not just stopping at the site, they're progressing through, which is really positive. And then finally, flooding incidents investigated. Again, we discussed this in Q2, but again, a continued focus given obviously the impact of recent storms. And at the end of Q3, we have 239 ongoing Section 19 reports being prepared. And we know that is likely to increase further. I'll hand over for any questions.
Thank you for the report. Do we have any questions, please? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just bear with me while I get that question up. Do we know, in terms of because there's a percentage of disabled adults that are working, and as we go through, Leicestershire, for example, is considerably higher than, say, ourselves. Do we have any data or any rationale as to why that is, and what couldn't? I suspect it's due to different employment types, etc. But I'm just curious if we've got any data on that, and what, if anything, we can do to up our percentage on that. Thank you.
I haven't got the data with me at the moment, but certainly can have a look in terms of speaking to Justin Hackney, obviously Assistant Director in Adult Care, around how we do compare what those opportunities are, and ask him to provide a narrative in relation to how we can improve that.
Debbie, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to add to that, we do have the data for adults with a disability who are open to us and who are employment, which is obviously different to the number of adults with a disability living in Lincolnshire. So just to be clear about what information we obviously do have available. We have also recently just received a grant in partnership with Health to be able to look at a project around promoting employment. So that may be something that the Scrutiny Committee may wish to look at.
Just to clarify, Debbie, when you say open, I assume you mean we are aware of them and they're under us for some manner of service, basically.
Yeah, that's right. They will be open to adult social care. Yeah, so it's not that they are just necessarily known to the council. It's not that they would necessarily have like a library ticket or something. It would be that that the information and the statistics we count, that those are that receiving social care support from the authority.
Great, thank you. Councillor Brockway, please.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Thank you ever so much for the report. And I thought your graphics were very interesting. Actually, interesting choice of colours. It draws you in, so it was very enjoyable. Can I ask a question about recycling? Well, reuse. I notice on page 45, when you drill down a bit into the different types of disposal of waste, in the reuse paragraph, you talk about a reuse process at household waste recycling centres whereby residents can present materials which is then passed on to other residents, etc., you know, without having to recycle or incinerate. I think that's a great move, but actually there's not an awful lot of room in some of the recycling centres. Now, years ago, there used to be what was known as a Seagull Recycling Centre in Skegness, and basically it was just a big hall, or not even a hall properly, and loads of stuff was taken there, things like overmakes of hotel tablecloths, and they put a slash in them so that they couldn't be sold on, but they could be used for children's costumes and for making dusters and all sorts of things. You would pay a certain amount per year. I think at that time it was only about £10 a year, and you would go in, take a shopping basket and fill your trolley and leave. And there were no more payments. It was hugely successful. It was great for schools, it was great for children's theatre groups, it was great for all sorts of activities. And I would guess, I mean, I don't have any figures because I wasn't involved in it, but it cannot have been very expensive to run. One building, bins and loads of bins, and people going round. And I wonder if the council might be willing to consider something like that, because it's such a positive use of other people's waste. Thank you.
Andy, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thanks. I think the key in the report, Councillor Brockway, is the issue that we are planning to introduce. So we're going through all of the logistics of actually how this will work and what is the right mechanism. But I'm quite happy for our Head of Waste to have a conversation with you and understand the detail of that previous experience. But the bottom line of this is, yes, it's based on the fact that there is an awful lot of stuff possibly going through the HWRCs, which has a positive and proactive other use, and we need to make sure we actually maximise that and make sure it goes to the right end user at the end of the day.
Thank you. Councillor Kendrick, please.
Thanks, Chairman. I was interested on page 49, the reference to the launch of the Lincolnshire Volunteer Managers Network. I was just wondering whether that includes people who manage volunteers in the public sector as well as the third sector. And outside this meeting, I'd be very interested to learn more about this network. Thanks, Chairman.
I can certainly check if the public sector is included, and also ensure that further information is passed if you want to get some more detail on that. That's no problem.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this? Councillor Marfleet, please.
Morning, Chairman. It does talk about, in effect, the extra care housing and Hoplands, but it seems incredibly, well, I don't know whether it's just me, but it seems to have been going on and on and on. And actually, we're still only in planning status. And I think that there is a sense here that the extra care housing is deemed as a good thing and a bit of a priority for the council. We perhaps need to just sort of get things moved along a bit quicker, rather than it does seem to be taking a long time to come to fruition, would be my comment on this. Far too long would be perhaps a better word. Thank you.
Debbie, do you want to
Yeah,
answer that, please?
I'll come in on that. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the Lincoln one is the first one to be up and running, but some of the others, as says in the report, have been particularly challenging around identification of partners, seeking agreement with the district council, seeking agreement about the revenue, about how it will work, seeking agreement about who will be placed within there, as well as more latterly some of the planning issues as well. So I absolutely take your point. I'll take that back and take that out of this committee and follow that up. I think some of it is because it's been new to us, that we're sort of testing our way through it, but absolutely take that on board, and I'll take that out of the committee.
Thank you for that. Do we have any further questions from the board? I've just got one, and that relates to page 47 on the separate food waste. I know that there was a scheme in South Kesteven where it was trialled in certain areas of the district. And unfortunately, the funding from the county council stopped. So I took the decision as portfolio holder at the time to stop it, because it was costing the district council quite a significant amount. And it does say in the paper that there'll be £2 to £3 million of annual revenue saving. Do we know if that is going to be rolled out, if we will get government funding for that? I know that's the ultimate question, but Do we know if that's going to happen or when it will be rolled out, please?
So there have been a number of false dawns in terms of the rollout of the requirements of the Environment Act. So we are now working to the latest projections of when that will be rolled out. The indication is from all the previous communication is that it will not be seen as a new burden and it won't come with additional funding to the County Council. There is still a question mark of whether there will be new funding to the collection authorities, which, as you know, Councillor, is part and parcel of the joys of a two-tier system when we're trying to deal with the waste agenda. All of those issues will be rehearsed and brought back through the waste partnership before final decisions are made, but we're currently working to the current rollout that government are suggesting.
That's great, thank you.
Can I expand on your question, Chairman?
Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Andy, for that answer. Do you foresee, as there is no new burden money for county councils or upper tier authorities, do you foresee any financial outlays we will have to make or any problems or pressures this will put on our budget as a result?
I don't believe so at the moment, in the context of how, with the impact that this should have, should ultimately be a positive in terms of how we manage the different waste streams. And one of the obvious issues is that if this waste comes out of the waste stream that is currently going through the EFW, it creates extra capacity in the EFW to potentially either be used for a different purpose and different waste that we can then perhaps look to sort of take through that, or it potentially has the benefit of removing some of the pressures and strains on the EFW, which then potentially may have some benefits in terms of ongoing maintenance, ongoing life cycle for the EFW. But again, we're in the early stages of trying to fully understand the implications.
Thank you. I have no further speakers, so I will move from the chair that the board supports the recommendations detailed on page 17 of the report, and I ask that our comments on the contents of the report on the performance information as they have been captured by Chiara, our designated scrutiny officer, be shared with the executive ahead of its consideration of a decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith. So all those in favour, please. Any against? Any abstentions? That is approved. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 8, which is the People Management Update Quarter 3. The report on pages 73 to 78 provides an update on the HR management information for Quarter 3, 2003 to 2023-24. I'm going back in time. Our action required is to seek assurance on the HR management information. This report will be presented by Tony Kavanagh, Assistant Director HR and Organisational Support. So over to you, Tony, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. So just to give you the edited highlights, in terms of from the HR information perspective, you'll note that turnover marginally increased in Quarter 3, but what we've seen is that over the last year that turnover has steadily declined and is currently stable following quite a big peak in Quarter 3 of 2022. We still have adults, children's and parts of resources with continuing challenges around recruitment and stability of the workforce, but we think as a council that we're performing well in terms of retention. In terms of agency spend, we saw quite a large increase in Quarter 3 of around 390,000. That was in part due to higher demand in on-contract services, so children's from early help and safeguarding, adult social care and community wellbeing, so particularly adult frailty and long-term conditions, and within parts of the resources. Again, they have traditionally been some of the more challenging areas and reasons for agency. We've also seen the off-contract spend continue to slightly increase with the usual challenges that we've got within educational psychology. But as has been rehearsed in here on a number of quarters, clearly the children's services are confident that that model delivery is the most cost-effective option for them. In terms of sickness absence, again, the council has seen a further decline. We continue to perform below our target of 7.5 days and are currently at 7.04. There are some parts of the council which are higher than that. So Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue is at 8.74, Children's Services at 8.45, and Adult Social Care at 8.38. All other parts of the directorate remain below that. But as a council as a whole, we're performing well in that area. The final area, just to update you on, was obviously at the end of December, we had our staff survey closed. We're currently in the throes of sharing that with the workforce, but I can bring a more detailed information at the next presentation of the committee for people management. What we've seen overall is higher engagement from staff's workforce. So we had 293 more individuals complete the survey than in 2021. Generally, every directorate had an increase in numbers within the response rates. Whilst it does say children was down from 40 in 2021 to 39 in 23, you'll note that we've had more individual staff members complete, because clearly there's been a growth in numbers within the children's services. The only area within the council to show a decline in engagement response was fire and rescue at 90%. And I shall leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll pick you up on that, actually. Do we know why there was such a decline in the fire and rescue responses to the survey, please?
We don't, but that's something we are trying to establish within the service, why engagement was so low. There has been, obviously, there's been the inspections and such like, which may have contributed because of the level of engagement required within those. But not sure why it was so low, but we're looking into that.
That's great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the board? Councillor Pepper, please.
Yes, just in a comment to what you mentioned about the low response, I very much suspect, because Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue is made up by and large by retained firefighters, on-call firefighters, and the only time they're actually on duty really to do admin and whatever is their 2-hour training period once a week. Other than being called to incidents, fires, rescues or whatever, that's the only time they're actually there to sit down and do something, and they've got quite a heavy workload anyway with doing checks and records and whatever and training, so it could well be something to do with that, I feel. Thank you.
Debbie, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to Councillor Pepper. I mean, just to support that, there's because they're retained firefighters and they only have 2 hours when they come in, they have a shared computer to be able to undertake the survey. There is paper available, but it's not as easy to work through a survey on paper, whereas most of our permanent staff who are permanently employed, not on a retained contract, obviously have various different IT devices, so it's easier for them. So I suspect all of that contributes, as well as the 2 most recent inspections that they've had, which has also meant a lot of surveys for staff as well. But we will look into that.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Brockway, please.
Thanks. Just a quick question on the table, please. I noticed that corporate, including commercial, had 215 answers in 2021 and only 37 in 2023. So how is that an upward direction of travel? Have we reduced staff or something?
It's just because of the small numbers of corporate as a area as was. Corporate, for the purposes of the staff survey in 2021, corporate and commercial were counted as one area. The commercial staff subsequently moved into resources and are now part of resources, hence the reason why there's that disparity.
Thank you. Councillor Dilks, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to support what Councillor Pepper said, really, I had occasion last week to visit Lincoln North fire station, and met firefighters there and had a good chat about the problems that they're facing. And one clearly is, as Councillor Pepper, you know, the actually persuading employers to release people these days, you know, in today's economic climate, to actually do the valuable work of providing, you know, the retained firefighters. It is a challenge they're facing, and some of the retained fire stations are facing real problems, in doing that, particularly when you look at the the population in an area, and then you look at the working population in a particular rural area. It can be quite a challenge at any time. But I just thought I'd raise that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dilks. Councillor Marfleet, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there's a couple of bits really, I think perhaps more for noting, but like agency spend is on the increase, and that is a large proportion going out there. And I think if we're not careful with the downside of agency spend is that people that are sort of on lower pay start to jump to agencies because it's in effect a way of getting higher pay, where actually in real terms we need to get the agency spend down and actually increase the basic pay, especially in sort of the likes of carers and all of that are on low wage. And so what they're doing is then coming out of the jobs to jump into agency to get £2 more. And in effect, then they lose all their rights and holidays and every other thing. And it's all just chasing £1 or £2. And what then we can't get reliability and end up going into agency staff. So it becomes all a bit of a double-edged sword, and it costs us quite a chunk of money, which we perhaps need to sort of work out a way in which we can help reduce that. Stick then 7 days off on everybody across the council. That's quite a phenomenal illness, and it's actually come down. I think several years ago it was nearly 10 days. So actually we have knocked 3 days off, which is very good, but I would always say we need to keep trying to drive that down. I think the problem is with those figures, you get long-term illnesses which skews the figures a little bit, and sometimes I think the long-term illnesses are best sometimes separated out to give a fairer reflection on what those that are sort of actually generally, there's a lot of people that never take a day off, and often they get lost in that system, and everyone's like here, an average doesn't often reflect really what often is going on in terms of the long-term illness. The final thing would be really to do with the survey, and it's nice to see the figures are going up. I have to do a survey at work, and if we don't do it, we all get shot. And I tell you what, the percentages are up about 90%. But that said, it's quite an interesting concept, really, because in effect, I believe in these surveys, but it's actually trying to create a culture where people feel that they can express their feelings without a repercussion. And it's surprising how people daren't really open up. And if you open the average up enough, i.e. go, say, 1 to 5, we'll give a different set of indicators than if you went 1 to 10. Because what you do is, unless you go extreme, you end up with an average. So they're quite interesting, but I think in some sense, it is a way that gives employees a voice. And it's up to them to actually whether they use that voice, and I suggest that all employers should use that voice, but I do also think that sometimes they do need reminding several times that there's an email and a survey to fill in, and I think we get better participation, but it'll be interesting to see what comes back from the feedback of that one. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Debbie, do you want to come in on those?
Yeah, I'll come in first, and I'm sure Tony will want to come in. I don't want to give Tony any encouragement that we should shoot any staff. But certainly we do try and cajole and encourage and send lots and lots of emails out. But, you know, we can do more and need to do more, because the more people that we hear from, the better and richer the data. I wanted to pick up on the agency issue, because you're absolutely right. Articulation of the problem is that the hourly rate for agency staff is higher. Obviously, they don't get any sick pay, they don't get any pensions, they don't get many of the other, advantages of working within the local authority. But I suppose if you're 21, 22, 25, you're not really thinking about your pension. and so therefore the hourly rate becomes really attractive. In particular, hard to recruit and hard to retain areas. We do a lot of grow your own, and what we find is that if we train particularly social workers and utilise staff who are based in Lincolnshire, got family in Lincolnshire and know Lincolnshire, they tend to stay. The retention rate across children's and adults is excellent for Grow Your Own. We have in some areas, particularly sort of post-COVID, because of the spike in agency, looked at retention payments as well. Some of that in adults was supported by a national grant. The council also invested in that and has continued to invest in that for this year as well, although we will, again, to continue to review it. I think the other important thing that our social workers in particular, and it's not just social work, we've got challenges in planning, in in legal as well, is that the environment within which they work, they feel safe because they feel as though they've got an accessible manager, they've got good terms and conditions, they've got really strong supervision, and that's sort of worth its weight as well, that they feel safe. But you're absolutely right. The agency challenge is a significant one. We have tried across the region to do what we call an agency memorandum of understanding. So rather than try and outbid each other for an annual charge, we've tried to lock what we would agree, say, across the East Midlands, and look at saying if somebody isn't qualified more than a year, then we wouldn't employ. But when agencies when local authorities are desperate, they break the memorandum of understanding. We have also challenged, particularly the Department for Education, to look at putting some more regulations in around you have to be qualified for 5 years before you can join an agency. Some of that. The Department for Education have agreed to look at it, but they've certainly not rushed to implement any of the recommendations.
Yes, Councillor Morley.
Just going in effect before we get to the mayors being elected or chosen, but we'll stand on his toes. But in effect, does LCC go to the colleges that provide further education for adult social care and have sort of like people that are social care workers go in and actually talk about their role and the benefits? Because there is a huge benefit there. Like you say, grow your own. And if we get them in when they're at that sort of full-time education, doing, 16 to 18, it's a great time to sort of recruit them. And as you say, most people see £1 extra. They don't see pension and all the perks, and actually they lose out. But do we connect enough with that full-time education?
Yes, so we have formal teaching partnerships with the university for particularly adult social care and children's social care. And what that partnership means is that we can look at do joint recruitment. So again, we're having a say at who they're recruiting onto their programme, which we look at a whole raft of things in terms of their likelihood to stay. We also support their programme so that we do various different sessions. So that means that at the end of it, they're more likely to be ready to be able to hit the ground running in how we work in Lincolnshire, because obviously they've been taught the Lincolnshire way almost. In terms of dipping down into colleges and into schools, the LEP provide a scheme. I'm going to look at Andrew to see if he can remember the name of it. Andy is one of the advocates, and there's a couple of schemes where you link up with a school and you give an hour, I think it's an hour a year or something of your time to go in and talk about what you do. And a number of our staff across the whole of the organisation, across, from all of the directorates, are part of that scheme. There is a name for it, but I can't remember it. And so we actually go in and do that work to share what it would be like to work in the council as well. I'll find out the name of it and I'll drop you a line.
Thank you.
Yeah, just I echo everything that Debbie said, but just to pick up on the trainees, the apprenticeships, that sort of thing that Councillor Marfleet mentioned and Debbie's reference. That I think the key thing that from a council's perspective is we've reached the stage now where our apprenticeship levy is pretty much spent, which is a really positive, because in previous years we haven't been, and that we've had to share some, or we've lost it. So the real sort of indicator, the fact that we're you know, fulfilling our whole budget for the apprenticeship levy is a real positive sign, just to, if that helps with the information.
Thank you. So is there any further comments or questions on this? No. So I'll move that the report be received and that the board is satisfied with assurance provided over the HR management information provided. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That is unanimous. We'll move on. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 9, which is the revenue budget monitoring report for 23-24, and it's quarter 3. So the report provides an update on the revenue spending for 23-24 financial year, detailing the actual income and expenditure for the 9 months until December the 31st, 23. It includes forecasts, a comparison with approved budgets, and an overview of the financial position supported by detailed appendices. The revenue budget is projected to be underspent by 11.9 million, 1.9% of the net budget, an increase from the revised quarter 2 position, primarily due to the increased underspend forecast in services and other budgets. The report highlights the impact of the executive's decision to invest in the windfall revenue underspends into place capital infrastructure. The forecasted year-end position would increase reserves subject to council's determination, and general reserves are expected to remain within the target range of 2.5 to 3.5%, possibly requiring an increase during the financial outturn process. The council's financial resilience, is indicated in this report, remains relatively strong, and the executive will consider this report on the 5th of March 2024. So our actions are that we consider the attached report to determine whether the board supports the recommendations the executive has set out in the report, and agree any additional comments to be passed on to them in relation to this item. So this report will be presented by Michelle Grady, Assistant Director of Finance, and over to you, Michelle, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think you've just stolen all my notes. So, summed that up very nicely. Thank you very much. So, as we've said, this is the quarter 3 forecast of the revenue position. We're currently forecasting an underspend of 11.9 million. That breaks down into 4.5 million in our service budgets, 4.4 million in other budgets, and 2.8 million of additional funding. This is predominantly a movement of 2.3 million from what we reported in quarter 2, and that's mainly due to, on our service budgets, it's due to a continued increase in the forecast traffic regulation order income, and underspends on our electricity and energy budgets in place and resources. It's probably worth noting that paragraph 114 sets out our risk around school transport. Members will be aware that we set aside a contingency of 9.4 million for the current year for school transport. We expect that to be fully utilised, and there is a risk that that also might overspend slightly as well. So that's being managed within the service, and looking to see what other underspends in that area they can use to offset that. In other budgets, we had a pay and pension inflation allocation that's not been fully needed, and that's contributed to the underspend in that area. And the funding that was greater than anticipated is around business rates, pooling, and other grant income. The appendices also give details of the planned drawdown of the development fund that members have put aside to deal with council's priorities. But I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Do we have any questions from Councillor Brockway, please?
I actually talked to the officer beforehand, because this is one of those questions where it's difficult to find out the wording for the question, let alone the answer. When I was reading this report, and can I say I find the background information very helpful always. The narrative I find gives me such a good picture of what's going on, so thank you. When I looked at this report, I decided I would have a go at following a thread through. And I concentrated on adult social care, and I kind of asked myself the question, how much do we spend in total on adult social care in this council? It turns out that that's a much more complex question than I'd realised. So, for example, I ran into difficulty when I looked at when the leader gave his speech at full council, he mentioned about a use of something like 359 million from the Better Care Fund. And I thought, is that part of our budget? Is that a separate fund? And then I looked at page 90 in this report, and it talks about almost 61.5 million from the Better Care Fund. So I don't actually know if this is a question that is possible for you to answer, and I don't expect an answer today. But I'd like to have some kind of indication how much, say, of the council's budget goes on adult social care. And is there any way of giving me some greater understanding of the grants and things that we get in? Because to me it seems that the sums are huge. Thank you. Sorry to give you such an awful question.
Always up for a challenging question, Councillor Brockway, so thank you very much for that. If I can refer you to page 90 of your report pack, which will probably help me talk through this a little bit. So the way we present our budgets are net of income, which is predominantly the problem that you're having. So, and I think adults in particular is quite complicated because of the joint working we do with health. So there's a big proportion of joint work and joint funding, particularly around things like mental health and various types of care provision. So it is quite a difficult question to answer. Sorry. So if you look at the table on Appendix A, page 90, the top two lines under adult care tell you that we have a net spend of 243 million. The Better Care Fund that is directly attributable to that is a couple of lines under, and you're quite right, it's 61 million. Because we present our budgets net, what that doesn't show you is the amount we're spending that's being offset by care contributions from service users, which is around just over 30 million. And also, as you said, we get other grants that are directly attributable to that line, things like the market sustainability, discharge funding and things like that. So my estimate is that the gross spend that we are contributing to in adults is around 323 million. But that line is our net contribution, effectively, those two lines, that 240 less to 60.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Could I just ask one more? When the leader mentioned 359 million and we've got about 61.5 million here, how do those two tie together? Better Care Fund.
I think I could probably come back to you with that information, but it is that wider spend that's jointly health and LCC that will make that up. The Better Care Fund has got different elements to it. This is the directly attributable bit to our costs, but there'll be a lot of joint efforts as well that make that figure up. So we can come back to you with that.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, and sorry for again, I suspect some more horrible questions for you, Michelle, so I do apologise because I suspect it's probably more Heather Sandy's area than yourself with what I'm about to ask, and you'll be relieved to know it's not school transport I'm going to touch on. I note the County Council fostering placements have increased in terms of costs by 39.3%. I also note that the report states that this is an exceptional circumstance. However, notwithstanding that, is there any action we can take in the short to medium term to mitigate such risks of such prices and increases in exceptional circumstances? Also, do officers not foresee that there is a risk that whilst the Send School programme in terms of expanding places in Send Schools, which I welcome have been and is hugely welcomed and hugely important, but the pressure will move from these Send Schools to mainstream schools, and you will then have a pressure for EHCPs because parents will want the maximum legal protection for their child, which of course has a cost implication for the council. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take this one. Okay, so there's two things going on around children's placements. And the first one is around children who need to come into the care of the local authority because of social care, and therefore they either need to go into a special guardianship order, which would be being placed with a family member, with fostering or with residential. And so those children may or may not have an education, health or care plan. So I'll come back to that one in a minute, because some of them do, some of them don't have an education and care plan. But the cost that you're referring to in terms of the increase around fostering at 39%, is because of a significant pressure nationally on the market. There is a shortage of places, and the market can basically charge what they want, particularly for residential with children with incredibly complex needs. And so we, like every other local authority, has struggled in terms of that significant increase in costs across the market, because basically the market can just decide whatever they want to charge. To try and mitigate that, we've looked at capital investment in our own residential homes, and Riverside, our most recent one, received their Ofsted registration yesterday, which is incredibly positive. And so we've had some significant successes in terms of trying to bring young people back from out of county into the placement. Absolutely. So I think there's more that we can do. I think there's more that nationally needs to be done about the market for children's residential, for children who need to come into the care of the local authority. You've then got children who aren't at risk from a social care perspective, are quite happy to stay with their parents and decide to move into Lincolnshire because the special education provision is really positive. And certainly we have spent and invested over £100 million in our estate to improve the number of places and the condition of our special schools. And again, really urge members of the committee to go and visit some of those schools. The work that's been done is absolutely tremendous, and I really pay tribute to everybody who's been involved in that programme. What we have seen through that programme is more young people being able to be placed in Lincolnshire, which is positive. And we are also, because of a raft of other things that we're doing, seeing not as big an increase in education, health and care plan as is been seen nationally. So it is going up, but not of the rate of national going up. I think you're absolutely right. The risk is, let's move to Lincolnshire because the special education needs provision is good. And if people choose to come and live in Lincolnshire, then if they've got a Lincolnshire address, it's our responsibility to provide the educational provision. So I think it is a huge risk as well. So completely agree.
Thank you. I suppose the issue is for us, Debbie, is, as you say, and I had a very helpful conversation with Martin and officers around this, so I'm very, shall I say, up to date around the special needs schools especially, is actually the new placements are not for anybody else that comes in, they're for people who are waiting already. So when it's an additional place that isn't there, but also for people or students who have less severe need, they are now, rather than going through the SEND route, going into mainstream schools. So of course, and there is the worry from parents of, will I want the legal protection and for not just education but also transport? If you have an EHCP or a statement, and I'm showing my age, you're also protected. So how, and as you say, it's not going up, but I think I saw in the report we had I can't remember the percentage increase, but it was a 4-figure number that it had gone up by. That obviously has a strain on officers' time and a cost to us. Is there really anything we can do, or is it a case of it's something we have to live with because parents understandably want the most legal protection for their child and they will fight and go through that process to get it, and we just have to make allowances and accommodate it, basically?
Yeah, thank you. And I remember statements as well. I think probably most of us do. So I think it's fair to say that the critical issue across the whole of the sector within local government at the moment, special educational needs, is high up there. Many local authorities, in fact, I think we're only one of 2 counties that aren't overspending. So many local authorities are overspending their higher needs budget because the special educational needs provision is funded through the school's budget, not through the local authority revenue grant. And many local authorities are under significant pressure. The government tried a number of programmes. You may have heard things like the safety valve programme to work with local authorities to try and get their overspend on the higher needs block down. I think they've had varying success. So certainly the overwhelming view, I think, of the sector, and CCN recently done an excellent report around special educational needs. It's not been published yet. They've done one on transport that has been published. They're due to publish one around special educational needs. I think that any new government will see that the current arrangement is not sustainable and that they need to tackle it through significant reform. That's increasingly the national view.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Dilks, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It was on, I just wanted to get some clarification on the biggest specific forecast underspend is 8.5%, 2.8 million on highways, which I found interesting after last week's conversation in full council. But I see that it's attributed to that figure, 2.8 million saving on highways relating to the traffic services relating to TROs, traffic regulation orders, and additional savings on street lighting energy. I just wonder if I could get any more shed a bit more light on that, particularly as I know that we put more money in the budget, was it last year or the year before, to sort of tackle the 2-year waiting list to start TROs. Thank you.
Michelle, please.
I can answer that. So we reported this in Q2 and obviously just mentioned it again in the preamble to the report. The traffic regulation order income is the fines we make to the utility companies for road works on our highway network that either was unplanned or not according to permits and things. So it's a fine effectively to deter utility companies from doing what they're doing. I'm sure there's a much more technical way to explain that, but it's the fines to the utility companies. We have a budget that we expect to collect from them, but it's been in excess of that during the year, and that's where that income has come from. So it's effectively a fine rather than dealing with our own traffic regulation orders. The energy cost is the electric bill effectively for street lighting and our properties. So we increased the budget when we set the budget for this year based on the trajectory of what was happening with the utility and energy prices at the time, but actually those costs haven't come to full fruition. So we've got savings both on our property estate and on our street lighting estate, which reflects that underspend in highways.
Thank you for that. And any further questions? I've got a couple. So we will go to homes, school, transport, education. Sorry, I can't move on from that at this moment. So, 1.14. Do we know a rough percentage of what we might spend over the contingency, or are we not at that point yet? Because I know the year end is coming up rapidly fast, but I'm just wondering a rough percentage.
Percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but I think I've heard figures around over £1 million, and obviously there might be other areas in that transport budget that's not school transport related that can offset some of that. So I think that's the latest figure that we've got, but clearly working through that still.
Yeah, that's a significant figure. And my second question relates to 1.15 actually on the same page. We did approve, and the executive have approved those revenue-funded capital investment. Is the 11.9 million on top of, or does that include spend on those projects?
So the budget for these have been taken out, so the 11.9 million is in excess of that. Yep.
Brilliant, thank you. That's answered that. Do we have any further questions? No? So I will move that the board supports the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report. and ask that our comments are captured by Kiara, our designated scrutiny officer, be shared with the executive ahead of its consideration of a decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith. So all those in favour, please show your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll now move on to item 10, which is the Capital Budget Monitoring Report 23-24 Quarter 3. And the report outlines a status update on the capital investment in comparison to the budget set for 23-24 financial year. And it includes an overview of the updated capital programme, incorporating external funding or rephasing even, adjustments made during Quarter 3. Appendix A to the report to the executive, pages 115 to 123, provides a detailed programme accompanied by narrative updates on the progress concerning key investment schemes. And the current projection indicates the in-year underspend, prompting the need for additional rephasing of the programme. And this report will also be considered by the executive on the 5th of March 2024. So our actions are to consider the attached report and to determine whether we support the recommendation to the executive as set out on page 107 of the report, and to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item. So this report will also be presented by Michelle Grady. Michelle, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So as we've just heard, there is a forecast underspend on the capital programme of around 25 million. Parts of this is to do with the phasing of the spend. So we've just mentioned about the items of revenue underspend that we used to increase the items in the capital programme. So this was predominantly schemes around the waste transfer stations, adjustments needed to deal with the Environment Act changes, Cross Keys Bridge electrification, LED replacements for street lighting, and £4 million towards the flood alleviation schemes that the exec approved during Quarter 2. So they were added into the programme this year, but clearly some phasing needed to deal with the delivery of that, and they may need to be delivered in 24/5. The other £15 million underspend is relating to our capital contingency, and as part of the budget setting last Friday through Council, that money was reallocated to schemes and they will be delivered during 24/25. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions on this item? No. Vice Chairman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Michelle, how are we, I suppose, fixed to absorb any potential external shocks that are beyond our control, be that sort of national with, say, for example, I don't know, the Bank of England might not say lower interest rates when we expect them to, or events further afield, say, Ukraine deteriorate more so, or the Middle East, or other parts of the world, which has an impact, say, on oil price or grain price, or which again is a follow-on to inflation. Are we fairly confident we can absorb those shocks?
So I think there's two bits to that. There's the cost of borrowing for the programme, which I'm sure Karen can probably cover much more eloquently than I can in her item, so I'll leave that to Karen. And the cost of supply. So I think we allow contingency in all of our schemes through the budget setting, and also we still have a corporate contingency to allow for shocks in terms of supply chain that might be caused by materials or delay in provision. So hopefully that should cover those things.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? No. So I will move that the board supports the recommendations to the executive and ask that our comments are captured by Kiara, our designated scrutiny officer, be shared with the executive ahead of its consideration of the decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith. All those in favour, please? It's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 11, which is the Treasury Management Performance Quarter 3 to the 31st of December 23. The report and appendixes, which is found on pages 125 to 150, outlines the Treasury Management activities and performance for Quarter 3 of the 23-24 fiscal year until the 31st December 23. It conducts a comparison with the approved Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy for 23-24, which received approval from the Executive Council for Resources, Communications and Commissioning on the 13th of March 23. The report also fulfills the reporting obligations outlined in the SIPVA Code of Practice for Treasury Management adhered by the Council. The Board is invited to review the report and pass any comments onto the Executive Council for Resources, Communications and Commissioning, and this report will be presented by Karen Tong, Treasury Management. So over to you, Karen, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. the report is broken down into the usual categories, namely the economy, interest rate, forecasts, investments, borrowing, and then any other matters. I'll highlight the main points from each category. So the graph on page 133 of your pack shows the movement of both short-term and long-term rates over the financial year to mid-January 24. Key things to note are that short-term rates have probably peaked now at 5.25%, with markets and Link Asset Services, our Treasury Advisor, expecting the next move to be a cut. Really just a question over the timing of when this first cut will be, and the likelihood is August, September of this year, is what the current thinking is. But this will very much depend on the Bank of England and its view of its tackling of inflation over the coming months. Rates are forecast to fall to 3.75% by the end of 24-25 and to further to 3% by 2027. And this is shown in Link's forecast table at the bottom of page 133. Looking back at the strategy and comparing it to that, at the time, rates were forecast to peak at 4.5% and then fall back to the end of the year at 4%. But there was a caveat that it very much depended on inflation and its movement, which has been shown to be more sticky than expected. Long-term borrowing rates have mirrored the movement in the bank rate over the year, and they too are impacted by inflation prospects. At the end of December 23, they were between 4.919% to 4.68%. These are the rates that impact our borrowing, but have since risen to current levels of 4.9 to 5.2%, which inherently aren't far from the short-term investment rates now, so nearly converging. They too are expected to fall gradually by December 26 to 3.5 to 3.9%. So we're on a falling trajectory for both short-term and long-term rates now. As predicted, the impact on rates all depends on the inflation issue again, which has dropped to 4% over the year and has remained there in January. The Bank of England does expect inflation to fall back to its 2% target level, but will not wish to cut rates until this is certain. Inflation levels in the service sector still remain very sticky, as consumers are still spending on travel, hospitality, going out to restaurants, etc. So they are definitely keeping an eye on that. Growth remains very tepid. We've just seen a technical recession quoted last week, in recent weeks. But it's thought that we've moved past that already, but growth is still going to be very, very slight over the forthcoming year, is what they're expecting. Factors such as inflation, wage inflation, or the conflicts in the world, and the general election are all factors that are going to influence growth and inflation going forward. For a detailed analysis of all what I've just said there can be found on Appendix A, page 134 of your pack, which is an analysis by Link Asset Services. Moving to investment performance, key points are shown on Appendix B, page 139 of your pack. This shows that investments at end of December were just over 268 million. The weighted average maturity of the fund dropped to 96 days from 121 from the previous quarter, as investments are now being kept shorter to meet liquidity needs for the year end. And interest return rose to 5.057, which outperformed the SONIA benchmark by 0.05%, I'm pleased to say. Investment balances are expected to drop by the end of the financial year, especially as no external borrowing has been undertaken, and we're using cash resource as internal borrowing to finance the capital programme this year. But then again, this will depend on the final revenue and capital programme outturns compared to budgets for 23-24. The Council is also well exceeding the benchmark comparators provided by Link, with similar levels of weighted average maturity and risk, which is pleasing to say. Just a note on the Council's lending list position at the end of December. This is shown in Appendix C, page 141. There were no breaches in investment limits during the year, but I just wanted to point out, although it doesn't relate to the quarter, there has been a counterparty removed from our lending list in February, which is Close Brothers, and this is due to falling credit ratings. Their ratings have dropped due to expectations for weaker profitability over the medium term, due to higher loan impairment charges, cost of growth and historical averages. They're also part of a FCA investigation regarding motor financing, which is under review, along with several of the banks, I hasten to add, and a report on that is expected in September of this year. But I hasten to add that because their credit ratings have fallen, they don't meet our required minimum standards anymore, so they've been removed from the list. But we do have an current exposure to them of 20 million, which falls to 10 million by May, and falls out completely in July of this year. So there's no concern at this stage over the maturity of these investments, which are expected to be returned in full, but it's just a comment that we are exposed to someone that's no longer on our list. Just quickly moving to borrowing then, key points are shown on Appendix F, page 149 of the report. This shows, again, no external borrowing has been undertaken as per the planned debt liability benchmarking. Projected external borrowing after maturing debt is expected to be just over 457 million at the end of the financial year at a cost of 3.7% on average. No temporary borrowing has been undertaken, no debt rescheduling. So one final comment is on the consultation from the Department of Levelling Up on the statutory guidance on MRP, which is minimum revenue provision. That was issued on the 21st of December. Proposed changes in the guidance concentrate on ensuring that all authorities make a prudent debt provision, and this will any changes will be effective for the 1st of April 24. We've responded to this consultation, but it's envisaged that any changes made will have minimal financial impact to our level of MRP for the year ahead. So that's all I wish to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Do we have any questions from the board? Councillor Brockway, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I particularly liked the little grey boxes where you showed your strategies. They were very useful, actually. Especially, I liked your security, liquidity and yield in that order. I thought it was great. Could I ask a question on page 128, please? There's the middle paragraph there. It's where you talk about, in the third quarter, performance being impacted because of liquidity and cash balances falling towards that point in the year. Is that something that happens every year, or is it particular years? And if it happens every year, is there any way of mitigating it going forward? Thank you.
It is common to restrict investments for liquidity at this part of the financial year towards the end of the financial year when spending does ramp up somewhat. So cash is leaving the bank quicker than normal. But this is particularly evident this year because we're sort of trying to meet the debt liability benchmarking. So we are reducing our cash balances somewhat as well in terms of supporting the capital expenditure using our internal resources. So it's a double effect this year, which is so I've been particularly cautious in lending too far out long term until there's evidence shown of whether we've met our cash balances or not as predicted. Like I said, during sort of the last quarter of the year, we are restricted in what we can lend anyway to meet that.
Thank you for that. Also, you mentioned the diagram on page 149, the liabilities, and I noticed that the blue columns there are going down slowly and slowly and slowly, the debt, if I can find it. Yeah, there it is. So it looks as though our debt is decreasing over the years. Is that right? Have I interpreted that right? And if so, are we going to keep it that way, or are we intending to take on more debt? Thank you.
Well, that graph to which you're alluding to is the debt maturing profile of the council going forward out to 2070 or something. So those blue bars, those bars represent the yearly maturing debt of the council. So if we didn't borrow any more, that's how our debt would go down by each year, representing those blue bars. And obviously, the decision to borrow in a particular year is determined by the capital programme and now the debt liability benchmark, whether we add to that going forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Vice Chairman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. You've partially touched on it, Karen, around the CIPFA code on what I was going to ask, but I'm going to expand on Councillor Brockway's point a bit further, and I discussed this with Andrew in pre-meeting in part. Do we foresee that actually it could be a bit of a headache because it's becoming, shall I say, especially the debt liability benchmark, it's becoming prescriptive in how we have to operate, whereas before that was there, we could think, oh, interest rates are advantageous. Yes, we've got the internal cash to do it, but why don't we borrow while the interest rate is cheap to do so? Whereas obviously now that the benchmark is there, so if we have the internal cash, we're supposed to use that to finance it rather than take additional debt on, even though potentially you could argue in some circumstances it may be advantageous in the long run to do it the opposite way around. And my second question is, which I touched on with Michelle, but I'm going to expand on a bit further, which is, how do you see the inflation for services such as, hey, highways? Because I'll give you an example. When the inflation hit its peak, regular inflation was about 6%, but inflation for highways at that time, I think, was something of about 25%. And it is still considerably higher than, say, what our inflation, I think, is about 4% now, but highways inflation is still considerably higher than that from memory. So what impact is that going to have? And is there any way we can mitigate that potentially without not, say, doing, say, as many potholes as we need to do and causing a risk for service for our residents down at the end of the line? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. I'll just answer the debt liability issue first. That's a new prudential indicator in the CIPFA code that we're obliged to adhere to. If we don't adhere to the results of that prudential indicator, then we have to report why. So we don't have to, it's not set in stone that we have to do what it says, but we have to have a good reason not to. So like I say, it is revised year on year as well, and for actuals, for movements in the capital programme and so forth. So we do follow what to do compared to the market, what the markets are telling us, but we wouldn't want to. Even though if rates are forecast to be cheap, we wouldn't want to take borrowing just for the sake of it. So, and that's what the indicator's trying to show, is that if you don't really need to, you don't take it, even if it is, you wouldn't, if an analogy with a mortgage, for example, you wouldn't take a mortgage when you didn't really need one, just because the rates were cheap. You know, that's what they're trying to allude to. But we would, you know, we're constantly reviewing it, and if we don't agree with the results for any particular reason, we would do, you know, what's best and then report as such. So on the inflation aspect, that's really a budgetary question. I think we deal with it through contingency for inflation. But do you want Michelle to answer?
Yeah. So Karen manages the Treasury in terms of what she's just said. I think the government are being a bit more prescriptive, but probably for good reason. For you know, the reasons that Karen's explained, to try and ensure that councils aren't holding cash that they don't necessarily need to, and borrowing when they don't need to. I think we've been a bit fortuitous over the last year or so that we've been able to manage our cash balances during a time when inflation rates are quite high, so it's been probably beneficial in that sense. In terms of the rates going up in highways, I mean, we did see during last year the highways maintenance rates increasing, and we had to do an in-year adjustment to meet that. So, and that's why we hold our contingency budgets, and that's why we do our medium-term planning over the 4 years. So there's a bit about the revenue costs, and we can manage those. And I think there is a bit of, you know, what does that mean in terms of what we can deliver? So the real cost of delivering highways, if it's more, then you deliver slightly less, I presume. But that's why we have that contingency, why we manage our financing costs over the medium term and longer term. And make sure that we're keeping those forecasts up to date, and particularly on the major schemes. So you'll be aware things like Grantham, Southern Relief Road, the budget for that's increased to reflect the price increases that happened during the last couple of years, and why we keep that contingency in place to deal with shocks as prices change going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks, please.
If I could just come in on that query about highways inflation. The performance report for Q3 that's coming to the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee on Monday does say in the conclusion that the latest inflation data suggests that the rapidly rising inflation experienced over the past 24 months within the construction sector has plateaued. So it is flattening out, so that threat to the highways budget looks as though it's starting to recede, from what I can make of it anyway. Thank you.
I think it's probably also worth noticing we did actually add an inflation element when we set the budget, when council approved it last week. So there was, I think there was 3 million in there to reflect on highways maintenance.
Thank you. Are there any further comments on this report? No, I can't see anyone indicating so. I will move that the report be received and that the board is satisfied with the activity and performance reported and with assurance provided for future forecasting. All those agree with me, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 12, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Strategy for Treasury Investments 24-25. It's a good title, long title. The report to the council, the leader of the council, executive council responsible for resources, communications and commissioning, outlines the Treasury Management Strategy Statement for the upcoming fiscal year 24-25. It details the expected Treasury activities encompassing the council's planned borrowing, Treasury investments, cash flows and banking. The report incorporates annual strategies for borrowing and Treasury investments, the minimum revenue provision, policy statement and the annual investment strategy for Treasury investments. The leader of the council is due to consider a decision between the 11th and the 15th of March 2024, and our actions are to consider the attached report to determine whether we support the recommendation to the leader of the council as set out on page 156 of the report, and to agree any additional comments to be passed on to the leader of the council in relation to this item. And this report will also be presented by Karen, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll highlight the key parts of the strategies for consideration, splitting these into the usual format of the economy, investments, borrowing. I find that's helpful to stick to the same format. I will add, though, that Robert Baxter should be with us remotely from Link Asset Services. They are Treasury Management Advisors, and he's with us today, and he will follow me by briefly commenting on our strategy from a third-party Treasury Advisor point of view. So moving on to the economy, the first cut in bank rate is expected in August 24 from its current peak of 5.25%, and it's expected to be 3.75% by the end of 24-25. Long-term rates are also expected to fall moderately over 24-25. Both of these forecasts, as I've said, are dependent on the inflation movement and outlook, and the Bank of England are cautious about cutting rates too quickly. The UK have already experienced a technical recession, and economic growth is now expected to be tepid at best over 24-25. A full commentary can be seen on Annex A, page 182 of your pack for more detail, which is provided by Link. The investments, moving on to investments, the Council's risk appetite for Treasury investments still remains low, with its priority always being security, liquidity, yield in that order. The annual investment strategy for 24-25 is shown as Annex AE of page 190 of your pack, and this outlines the limits we place on making investments and conforms with this low risk profile. Cash balances of the Council are forecast to be around 200 million, including pension fund cash, which is pooled with Council cash. For 24-25, 100 million of core cash for liquidity is targeted in line with the debt liability benchmark, as we've already discussed. We'll continue to benchmark investment performance against SONIA, which is the Sterling Overnight Index average for 24-25. The Council's investment strategy, taking into account investment factors and interest rate forecasts, is detailed in paragraph 2.46 of the report on page 176, which will follow for the year ahead. Turning to borrowing, in line with the SIPFA Prudential Code, prudential indicators which limit the Council's borrowing and investments activity are set to ensure that the Council's expenditure plans are affordable, prudent and sustainable. These prudential indicators are shown in Annex B, page 184 of your pack. The Council's got significant borrowing requirement over the next 3 years to meet its capital expenditure plans, which amounts to just under 202 million. This is shown in 2.32, page 167 of your pack. The debt liability benchmark, which is a prudential indicator, as I've said, has been calculated in accordance with the new code. This is shown in Annex D, page 189. This benchmark focuses on what level of external borrowing is required in order to keep investment at a target level of 100 million to meet liquidity. And it shows that external borrowing will be required in 24-25 to the tune of around 22.5 million at the moment to maintain this liquidity position, as given the stated capital expenditure plans. This is in contradiction to the 23-24, where it was showing that we didn't have to borrow. So it is turning round. The Council's minimum revenue provision policy is shown in Annex C, page 186, and details how the Council will set aside cash resource from revenue each year to repay its borrowing. This forms prudential indicator number 6. The policy has been revised to conform to proposed changes to statutory guidance on MRP, currently in consultation with the Department of Levelling Up. Prudential indicator number 6 also shows that the Council's cost of borrowing plans remain well within the limit set of 10% of net revenue stream. Prudential indicator number 3 is the Council's authorised limit for external borrowing, or its affordable borrowing limit. This limit includes other long-term liabilities, which are, in effect, finance lease agreements, which is similar to borrowing recorded on the Council's balance sheet. The limit for long-term liabilities has been increased in 24-25 to accommodate for any extra finance leases to be recorded on the balance sheet for 24-25 as a result of a current IFRS 16 accounting standard, requirement. This increase is, I would say, an estimation only at this stage. We may need to revise the limits once actuals are established throughout the year. The Council's borrowing strategy for 24-25 is detailed in paragraph 2.3.6 on page 173 of your pack, which it takes into account all the factors and interest rate forecasts mentioned in the report. And finally, one other matter is the introduction of a knowledge and skills framework for those involved in Treasury management, both officers and members. And this is a new requirement of the Sitford Treasury Management Code 2021. This has been developed and will be launched in April 2024. It will involve identifying competencies appropriate for each role of those involved, self-assessment against those competencies, which will take the form of a questionnaire, and tailored learning plans to fill any gaps, and monitoring of attendance at training sessions. Any training sessions for members identified for gaps in knowledge are likely to be met internally by the Treasury team, supported by Link Asset Services throughout the year. So that's all I have to say, Chairman. If I can just ask Robert to comment before we can take any questions. Thank you. Hopefully he's there.
Unfortunately, it appears that we can't hear what's being said at the moment.
It looks like he's trying to rejoin.
Unfortunately, we still can't hear Mr. Baxter, so we'll move on at the moment and see if you can come back in a bit.
Okay.
Seems to work then. Just speak. Yeah, we can hear
Can
you
everyone
now.
hear me now?
Yeah, we can, yes. Thank you.
That's good. That was a bad start, wasn't it? Right, so if you can still all hear me okay, I'll just start by saying that Chris Scott is normally the council's client relationship manager, but unfortunately Chris is away at the moment. So I'm standing in on his behalf to go through the strategy report for you. Just by way of background, I used to be the financial services manager and the chief financial officer latterly at City of Lincoln Council up until 2019 before I joined Link. So I am a bit of a neighbour for you anyway. So everyone hear me okay still?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. So just in terms of the TMSS then, I think it's worthwhile just sort of starting really with a quick summary of the interest rates and where they are in our forecast, etc. So Karen has said that they have peaked at 5.25% in the UK, and our forecast is for them to drop down to around 4.75 by September, and then by 4.25 by December of this year, and then seeing it drop to about 3% by September of 2025. Karen had said as well that obviously that is reliant on inflation behaving itself and coming down, in the way that we think it's going to. And obviously that this is a forecast at the moment, which will be revised depending on what happens. But this is what we know at the moment. Just in terms of the council, so for many years it has had an internal borrowing position and this has increased to about 30% recently, which I would say is about average across our client base, really. So it's not unusual at all, and is sustainable, certainly in terms of the council's cash position, and is in line with other county councils as well. Just in terms of borrowing, so the council is due to borrow 22.5 million in 24-25, and this is to maintain the £100 million liquidity, which ties in with the liability benchmark, which I think is fine, and it builds into the fact that we see interest rates falling in 24-25, and will obviously depend on things like capital spend, slippage, and that type of thing as well. Just in terms of investment balances, they are likely to drop over the year, and again that will mean that the portfolio duration actually reduces, and again this sort of falls in line with where we see interest rates going. So in a falling interest rate environment, it's likely to get better rates in the sort of up to 6 months area anyway, so that would fall quite nicely with that. In terms of the methodology for counterparties, which the council follows, it does look at our counterparty methodology, but it does apply a further, more stringent overlay on top of that as well, which does mean that the council does have or seek out higher quality banks with a longer suggested duration compared to what we would suggest. This policy has served the council really well, and continues to serve it well, I think, and it will continue to change based on the current circumstances. So overall, I think the strategy is fit for purpose and makes sense in terms of from a advisor perspective.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Do we have any questions or comments from the board? No? No, I'll take that as we've got no comment and we're quite happy with it. So I will move from the chair that the board supports the recommendations to the leader of the council, and I ask that our comments, which there haven't been any because we seem to be quite happy with it, are captured by Kiara, our designated scrutiny officer, be shared with the leader of the council ahead of his consideration of a decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Smith? All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 13, which is an update report on the Lincolnshire Public Law. And this report can be found on 199 to 202 and seeks to update the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on the progress on the creation of the legal services company Lincolnshire Public Law even. So the board is invited to review the progress made in relation to setting up of LPL, and this report will be presented by Will Bell, Chief Legal Officer. So over to you, Will, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you've outlined, Chair, the purpose of the report is to update the board on the progress made in establishing Lincolnshire Public Law, which is effectively the trading arm of the in-house legal service. And the purpose of establishing the Lincolnshire Public Law was to keep pace with the demands of our district clients who have diversified in the way that they're setting up alternative delivery structures such as companies. So we needed to do something to keep pace with their demands, but to ensure that we kept compliant with the Solicitors Regulatory Authority requirements. So as a result of that, a lot of work has been undertaken to ensure that we do fulfil the Solicitors Regulatory Authority practice requirements, which are quite onerous and effectively put Lincolnshire Public Law on a footing with a private sector legal practice. And this has involved a number of policies being put together, including information governance, money laundering, terms and conditions of service, conflicts of interest, client care. So a lot of work has been put in place, as I say, to develop the necessary policies to ensure that regulatory compliance. In addition to that, we've been required to allocate a dedicated physical workspace, so any work that's undertaken by Lincolnshire Public Law is in a secure, isolated workspace away from the rest of the in-house team. And we've also provided a dedicated website so prospective clients can do some further research into the background of the company with a view to hopefully bringing their business our way. And pleasingly, since January 2024, when we began trading We have picked up a couple of instructions from district council clients, particularly in the area of property. And since we discussed the matter at the briefing, Chair, we've had a couple of inquiries from authorities further afield as well, who are outside of the Lincolnshire area. So word is beginning to spread of the development of the company, which is a positive. And allied to that, given the retirement of my counterpart David Coleman shortly from the County Council, Councillor Buttroyd, as the Executive Council, has recently taken a decision to appoint Lisa Tremble, the Head of Legal Services, as a replacement Director on Lincolnshire Public Law for David. And in due course, the company will appoint Lisa to become its Compliance Officer for Legal Practice and Anti-Money Laundering Officer, again to satisfy the practice requirements of the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that presentation. Do we have any questions? Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question. I just want to say congrats to all involved on getting where we are. I know it's been a long road from when Councillor Boothroyd's come here before, and it's been to this committee before. So just want to say congratulations and well done to everyone involved. And please pass on my best to David, and I wish him a happy retirement.
Thank you, Councillor. I will do, and as you say, I'll pass that back to the staff as well, who have put an awful lot of work in this to get us to where we are today. So thank you for that. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you. I think those comments are echoed by the board as a whole. I've just got one question that relates to capacity of staff. This organisation is going to be an arm's length type company of legal services, Lincolnshire. I'm just wondering, as we take on more work within that organisation, have we got the capacity to ensure that our work as the County Council continues to be done and we don't have an impact on the services that we provide? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Chair, and it's one that we will have to take a decision on a case-by-case basis. But you're absolutely right. The priority must always be that we ensure we keep up provision to our district councils and the County Council itself. So it's always going to be a finely tuned decision in terms of whether we can absorb work or not. But that will be obviously a discussion in the round with the relevant practice leads within legal services. I must say there is a real appetite within the service to develop this and make it grow. It's something that they're really, really proud of, but at the same time extremely conscious that they need to continue and deliver the high levels of service to our district council clients and the county council itself.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Are there any further questions on this? No, so I will move that the report be received and that the board is satisfied with the progress made in relation to setting up of LPL. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 14, which is the Scrutiny Committee work programmes, and you'll find this on pages 203 to 216 of the agenda pack. It is this board's primary responsibility to oversee the work programmes of other scrutiny committees, ensuring satisfaction with each committee's overall work programme and planned activities rather than engaging in detailed discussions on specific items. The report provides us with an update on the activity undertaken by the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee and the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee, and the report invites us to review and comment on the contents of the report and record our satisfaction with the activity undertaken and endorse the activity planned for the rest of the 2024. The report will be presented in two parts, and we'll start with the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Committee, and that will be presented by Councillor Kendrick, the Chairman of the committee, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Yes, my report for the board is as follows. The committee has met twice since the last update I gave in November and considered the items as set out on pages 206 to 208 at our meetings held in December and January. At our December meeting, the committee reviewed the current childcare sufficiency position within Lincolnshire and the recommendation to support the development of early years and childcare places in Lincolnshire to meet the statutory childcare sufficiency duty. We were informed about the significant announcements from the government in the spring 2023 budget, which has seen an expansion of funded education places. From April this year, the funded offer will include 15-hour funded places for 2-year-olds of eligible working parents. The offer will further expand to 15 hours for eligible working parents of 9-month-olds by September this year. And by September 2025, the offer will be 30 hours of funded education to children of eligible working parents from 9 months old to school age. In January, the committee supported the Childcare Reforms in Early Years funding formula proposals to the Executive Council for Children's Services, Community Safety, Procurement and Migration to improve the use of early years and childcare grants to support the implementation of the expanded government offers. This will have an impact on the sufficiency of childcare places needed, although some eligible working parents are already accessing childcare. A survey of the childcare sector has been conducted to ask about the number of existing children where they are already attending nursery provision and the parents are paying for the places, as those children would convert to funded childcare places obviously later this year. The committee will learn more about the implementation of these reforms and their impact at our meeting on the 6th of December this year. With regards to our future work programme as set out on pages 208 to 210, I have three changes to report. The pre-decisionary scrutiny items on Gosberton House Canopy, Minerva House project and primary school mobile replacement scheme have been deferred from the 19th April agenda to the 14th of June agenda. This is due to waiting for final costings for each project. Our next meeting, the committee's next meeting, will be on the 8th of March, where we will be reviewing performance data from Lincolnshire schools' national testing and examinations in 2023. And these will cover the outcomes at early years foundation stage, key stages 1, 2 and 4. And that concludes my update, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. And we'll now go to the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee, and we've got Councillor Nigel Pepper, the Chairman, presenting that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Since our last update to the board, the committee has met in December and January and considered 10 items in total. The report within your agenda pack provides a brief account of the discussions held on pages 211 to 214. At our meeting in December, we considered a proposed decision by the Executive Councillor for NHS Liaison, Integrated Care System, Registration and Coroners in relation to the re-procurement of LCC coronial toxicology services. Concerns were raised about the timescales for toxicology test results and the impact on families waiting for these results. It was clear from pre-market engagement that the timescales in the current contract were not realistic, which would explain why they had not been met and had created a backlog. It was confirmed that realistic timescales for all types of cases had now been identified, and these would be reflected in the new tender documentation. The committee recommended that, if not already done so, specific defined timescales for each type of test should be built into the contract. In January, the committee reviewed the work undertaken by the Council's Trading Standards Service in respect of food safety standards enforcement in 2022-23. We were advised that following last year's challenge from the committee regarding the low number of inspections carried out, the team has looked at ways to improve their efficiency. Part of the improvements have included bringing food officers together in one specialist team to give the team more opportunity to focus on areas of work. However, the service does struggle to recruit officers with a food qualification, and as a result, the service is doing its best to train more officers. There was a recognition that the service would fall short of the number of interventions required under the Food Law Code of Practice, and we requested that future reports identify how many interventions the service should be making and how many were actually taking place, along with information on any backlog. There are no changes to be reported to our work programme as set out on pages 214 to 216. Our next meeting is on the 19th of March, where the committee will be considering a pre-decision scrutiny item relating to the re-procurement of the LCC library services prior to a decision by the Executive Councillor for Fire and Rescue and Cultural Services between the 25th of March and the 1st of April of this year. In addition, we'll be sitting as the Crime and Disorders Scrutiny Committee to consider an update on the delivery and outcomes of the domestic abuse strategy and an annual position overview of activity undertaken and planned to tackle serious violence. Chairman, that concludes my update. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Do we have any comments on those two scrutiny reports? No. So I'd like to thank both the presenters for their detailed reports, and I move that the board's satisfaction in the work undertaken be re-recorded and the board endorse the work programmes as have been developed to date. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That's unanimous. So we'll now move on to item 15, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board work programme. This report is on pages 217 to 226 of the pack and provides an overview of the contents of our own work programme. We do not normally debate this item, and our action is to note its contents. So therefore I move that the report be noted with the caveat of any necessary amendments identified since the publication of this agenda, which will be incorporated by a designated scrutiny officer. Can you please raise your hand if you agree to that? Thank you. That is unanimous, and with that, that is agreed. And with that, we also conclude the business of this meeting. So thank you all for your attendance this morning. Thank you.